Morning, everyone. No, this video isn't another review of my my current list, which has not changed since the last video I put out on it. Some of you asked for this version of it. There, take a screenshot. That's the list I run. I've already talked about it, but this is a kind of not a rant, maybe a rant. I actually made another video a couple days ago that's about a half hour long where I talk about this a little bit among some other stuff that I don't think it'll get released. I think this will be the one I put out instead. Instead, I'll break that topic into a couple things because I was talking about like deployments and stuff. Um, but I think one thing over the last couple months, years, maybe years at this point since the pandemic is I'm getting a little tired of is matrices and like pairings and stuff like that. Um, and the reason is not that I think it's unimportant, not that I think I'm bored of it or something like that. It's part of the game. It's part of everything. It's good and done perfectly or done correctly. I think it's positive to help winning team tournaments. It just feels like there is a lot of effort put into it when the answer, like it really just detracts from the game itself, in my opinion. And honestly, I think a lot of its value devolves. Is that the right word? I don't know. Or I don't know. I feel like a lot of its value is not actually maximized by most people in the game, including I don't think I'm a great matrix maker myself either. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've done enough pairings throughout events and scrims now and whatnot that a lot of matrices are not the same. Like a lot of people will put something as positive and their opponent will put something as positive, and is the answer that one of them's wrong and it's really positive for one, or the answer that it's just an even match? And honestly, that answer probably isn't even figured out after playing it because, you know, who's to say um, who's correct if they're both not like top or analyzing the game properly? um, because there's so many factors in creating a matrix color or whatever, and we put so much effort on, is this good or bad for me? And everybody has different like takes on, is something good or bad? One thing I've noticed, and I'm kind of the same way, is people put armies that shoot as a lot worse than armies that don't shoot. Like it's very clearly like if an army shoots a lot, people will mark it poorly compared to armies that don't shoot a lot. Um, and unless there's something super obvious that even then, I think people tend to overreact on specific things like what's a good one? Like sometimes div magic in certain matchups. I'm sure in demons it's really bad. Like if you have two greater demons and they have a mobile div mage, like it's really bad for you. There's not much you can do about it. But like if you look at my army in alchemy, right? Yes, my chariot doesn't have a save. My lord can't go out of a unit. My knights are pretty vulnerable to some alchemy, and then like you play against it, and depending on if the alchemy mage, what army it's in and all this stuff, you just fucking deal with the fact that they have a good spell versus you. A lot of spells are good versus a lot of armies. Like there's always a spell, there's typically a spell out there that's I don't like that much, and you just I don't know. You play the game, and I wouldn't mark it red because of that. You don't mark an army red because they have one Dragonbane gem and you have a burning blade. You just avoid it, or you go somewhere else, or you play around it. That they're always going to have things that are good versus you. And so I think in the Matrix, a lot of people see one thing, whether it's Comet or Ambushers or something, and they're just like, absolutely, I cannot deal with this. And a lot of times with shooting, a reason that comes with shooting is, you look at my army and you look at somebody who shoots like an ID army or even an Empire army. with a cannon and a stank cannon, and you're like, fuck, man, like it can kill this elder, it can kill this elder, it can kill my chariot, it can, maybe wound my herald. And then the actuality is they can only shoot one thing a turn. They can only shoot everything once a turn. And half the time they're gonna miss like their shot. So like there's just turns where they roll like a 2 and a 3 or a 1 and their cannon misfires and they can't shoot anymore. And they just don't do anything. Or they do like 1 wound to you or 2 wounds to you and you're like, whatever, I just deal with it. And so a lot of times shooting is very focused on like, oh my god, they have so many shots. Especially, what's the way to think about it? One, you kind of disregard cover sometimes, the fact that they might not be able to shoot, or have really minuses. But I think as things get more powerful at short ranges, people tend to forget like what it's like to actually play on the board and what control you have to avoid it. For example, blunderbusses are 12-inch range, and they're very powerful shots. But like, they won't shoot you turn one. They won't shoot you if you stay out of 21 turn one. They can only swift reform and go, shoot 15 to the side. They hit on 5s. If you're in cover runes, they hit on 7s all the time. If you can block yourself with cover, there's things like that where it's just like, yes, if they have a million shots and you put your whole army right in front of them and you don't do anything to stop it, shooting is really bad. But in actuality, especially like if you're an army that can like rush somebody and just weather the storm for a turn or two, it doesn't matter because they can't fight their way out of like 2 models. So I think shooting is always rated very low. I do think people tend to be on the conservative side on play style too, and this probably comes a little bit from an ETC perspective where they don't want to let down their team. And so I think you get these matches where people are maybe surprised that they feel like an army can just come at them and fuck them up. And they are surprised that the enemy didn't try to do it. And then it just kind of 10-10 or, sat in a corner and got a small win one way or the other. And so I've seen people rate things really badly. And I'm like, how do you expect them to get to you and do this? Because if you put your whole army in a corner and depending, or like, down here, and depending on the scenario, if they can even win it, if it's secure and you put your army in a corner and you just have to get to like, defend this line and you tie the objective, then, the question is always going to be, how do you expect them to get the 0 or the 5? And so a lot of people I've seen rate things really red, and I try to tell them, it's only really red if they can make it happen. The enemy can make it happen, right? If you can't stop them from coming at you, and that's sometimes you can't. Like sometimes, like I push on everybody pretty much. I push a lot of the time, and so I have the agency to go get points if I want it. And it's not always easy. If some armies want to castle up, it's actually really hard for me sometimes. And if people come out to play, it's a lot better. But I'll use an example. Like I think one of my teammates marked ID as red, and they were like, "Their empire. It's Ben. It's Ben." He marked ID as like red, like bad, and I was like, I don't. How are they getting? They're the fucking foot slogging. They're not like Monster Mash. They're not super fast. They were just basic bitch ass guys. And I was like, I don't know how you expect them to get across the board and table you. And I think the other guy had it like as maybe a minor win for him. And it's a big difference, like in pairing process, whether it's like an 8 to 11 or whether it's a 0 to 5. And so, again, I'm not trying to pick on Ben for that. And the same can be the other way. People put, oh, this match is so easy, it's green, I'm going to crush them because they played some guy that ran at them in America or something, in an online event where they don't care. And then they play the actual matchup and the guy sits in a corner or plays cagey. It doesn't always have to be in a corner, and they can't break through and they get 12 points when, they told me they get a 15. And so I think people look at matchups from a very, I don't know, like they don't actually know how the game's going to go. And so they have this, and that's why, listen, I don't know how a lot of games are going to go. I haven't played everything. I don't play 20 games a week or anything. I'm good with the list that I play. You know, a lot of it's on the table as well. That's probably my, if I wanted to start from the, the final argument, is that a lot of Warhammer is on the table. Like, you can, there's only so much looking at lists can do. You can look for advantages. You can see what they have and do some math and kind of know going in. I think that's something people don't do um, a lot of, but is actually kind of maybe the best thing you can do when comparing lists is, you know, you get a matchup and assuming there's no super red flags and you have an idea, is kind of doing the math and saying, ooh, you know, my character beats his character, or if I charge here, I should only lose by one and I can hold him or pin him. And just knowing those things in the middle of the game are pretty interesting. You know, and sometimes you do the math and you're like, ooh, that's way worse than I thought, or ooh, that's a lot better than I thought. And so it kind of helps your confidence in that sense. But again, I think people aren't good enough, and it's too complicated to see like exactly. You don't know what the other person's going to do. You don't know how they're going to set up or how they're going to play it. And so there's like a plethora of different ways where they're going to come at you, whether they're going to sit in a corner, whether they're going to be scared of everything. Are they going to give you long charges? They're going to take long charges, all this stuff. And the and so you put all this thought into like this color for a matrix that sometimes I think defines you in a poor way. Like I think I do a lot of yellows because I just want to play the game and see how it goes. I don't, you know, I don't want to put myself in a hole of saying, "Oh, I really think this is really bad," or "Oh, I think this is amazing," and then play it wrong and die because of it. Now, sure, I do put greens when I think I have a little bit of favor just because of movement and stuff like that. But I don't know. I feel like matrices are. It's like chess, right? It's like looking at a chess position in the middle of the game. If you're not a good player, you have no idea if the chess position is good or not, unless you really count the pieces and maybe But there's nuance there where you won't be able to see it, like see combos and see stuff like that. While really, really good chess players can see that. And so I don't know. I think there's some of that here where like most players just can't judge matchups accurately because they're not going to play it accurately or accurately air quotes, whatever you want to call it. And two, it's just like I don't know. There's so many decisions to make on the table. You can pressure opponents. You can create crazy situations. You know, and that's one reason I think I've talked about like adding a little bit of chaos to the game. When two armies just line up and they both sit on their corners and they're going to shoot their cannons and cast a couple spells, that's kind of it's you're not putting a lot of pressure on the enemy to be anything special or to make mistakes. Like it's so hard to make it's only so hard to make a mistake when you're like throwing dice at spells and shooting your rockets or something, right? Whereas if you put pressure on the enemy or games that are more like a little bit more action packed, you're giving your enemy the opportunity to mess up, the opportunity to do something dumb, and giving yourself the opportunity to maybe make plays. And so I think there is value in that as well. And I think people play like super scared a lot of the time. People are just super conservative about a lot of stuff. But I just, in my rant is I'm kind of tired of pairings and matrices. I think I'm just realizing that a lot of people just don't know how to properly assess enemy armies. Like, and vice versa, like the enemies as well. Like there's not some like you overthink your own matrices because like especially the pairing process. You know, you've seen a matrix before. You have a matrix and you have an army that has two reds, and you're like, we can't put them up first because if we put them up first, they're gonna counter with these two armies, and we're gonna get a red matchup. And fucking, I've done it kind of similar where I put that army up, and like the enemy doesn't give you one of the two because they don't think it's red, and so that just like you think it's this strategy of like maximizing your greens and give and take, but most of the time the enemy's matrix doesn't even look like yours, and they think they're getting greens, and you think you're getting greens, and then you just have a game on your hands, and that's probably better in the sense, but it doesn't like you don't win any like it doesn't matter You don't win anything for winning pairings. It's just, do you have the players that can pull it off? Now I'm all for, if you're a Scourge Curtis analyst and you don't want to play against Div, I'm all for like protecting that in the pairing process, and I'm all for there are matches that are harder. I think it's not always a, you know I can't win, I can't lose thing. I think it's more of like shades of what how risky is it for me? How much do I have to commit to go in? Um, can I break them? I think of it more as like this, and this is probably a better way. Well, I only go one direction, which is like in. So I have a different way of thinking about it. If you're a more defensive army, you have to think about, if the enemy rushes me, how do I feel? And if the enemy sits in the corner, how do I feel? Because I tend to rush everybody, I tend to think about it as like, what happens if they just sit in the corner? Can I break them or not? It's hard for me to break a really huge dwarf army with like a bunch of characters, but it's not hard for me to just avoid them and they can't do anything because they're moving three fucking dwarves, right? Um, and so I guess if you have the control, it's a little bit easier to talk like this. I also think people rate armies that are like kind of bulky, or blocky, maybe slightly better than they should. Um, an example would be like if you saw like a lot of, I don't even know how to put it. I'll put it this way. It's hard to see on paper. Like if you look at an army list on paper, what do you look at? You look at like the shooting, like you look at the magic, you look at the scoring, you look at some of the other key pieces, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you look at everything, but like the things you focus on are probably not actually as relevant to like the game. Like when you get in the game and you're like, oh, they can't get the objective because all their scoring is like fucking move 5 and they can't walk up because I have an elder sitting behind a hill or something, right? Or they have a big ass unit of dwarves with 3 characters and you're like, I can't kill that, and then you're like, oh, I can just walk away from it and it literally can't fight me because I'll never fight it, right? Or it's too slow, or if they deploy some unit on this side of the board and I'm over here, they'll never make it across in time. And so, these huge units that have like a lot of attacks, like warriors with great weapons and stuff, which are fine. I'm not saying they're bad units, but sometimes you're just like, oh my god, it's so I can't fight it, and then you get on the board and you're like, well, it's too slow to even get to me some half the time, or it doesn't make it there till turn 4, and I just flee. Stuff like that, where on paper you're like, oh my god. You don't see a lot of speed on paper. You don't see a lot of zoning on paper. You just see like, and on paper, magic phases are like 12 dice to 0 because you think about every good spell they have versus you, and then in actuality they roll the 2 phase and it's 6 to 5, and you stop their best spell, and then they have whatever their second best 2 dice spell is or something like that. So again, I think people think about worst case, all and it's just not good enough. They're just not good enough to do it. Know if it's good or bad. I mean, if people just rated like, please don't give me these two, and please I like these two, you could probably pair decently with that strategy in mind. Of course, the better the matrix, the better the pairings. It's just kind of, because I do the pairings and because I talk a lot with my team about matrices and stuff, it just doesn't feel, it just feels less important than people give credit for. Like just being better at the game is probably, a lot of games I'm just like, let's let me play the game and let me see if I can beat this fucker. Let me just see if I'm better than he is. You know, it doesn't matter. I'm repeating myself, but it doesn't matter what you put on the paper. It doesn't matter what you rate it. It makes zero difference. Once you're paired into it, you should just throw the rating away because it doesn't matter. Now you got to think about how you're going to win the game. What can you actually do? And see if you were right or wrong and know better for next time. But I guess don't play to your rating, I guess, is probably an interesting one to put, right? If the enemy gives you an opportunity to fucking go get them, go get them. Even if you put it orange, or if, you put it orange and you're fearing the enemy is going to come at you and they play like a bitch, take the points and be happy with it. Learn for next time. I think the hardest thing there is like people think of the worst case, which is usually, I don't know if it's rushing them or what, but is it even feasible? I don't know. That's the kind of question I ask myself too. People are like, "Oh, he didn't rush me. He played like a bitch or something. And sometimes I ask him, like, could he do it? Like, do you think he could feasibly rush you and you not be able to counter it? Because a lot of times, again, we look at isolation. You look at 9 Wild Riders and you're like, oh my god, I can kill anything in my army, and then in actuality, you shoot half of them down, you chaff them in their frenzy, you know what I mean, stuff like that. So I don't know. It is what it is. It's part of the game. It's part of ETC. It's not as important as people make it out to be. We're still going to try to get it right. I just wanted to kind of rant a little about how I feel about. I'm just tired of it. We're just no one's ever fucking on the same page with ratings, and then you just play the game and be better. But yeah, got some scrim games coming up. I can't really talk about them specifically because I don't want to give away all the lists of players that I'm scrimming against. But yeah, ETC lists are due in 3 weeks. They'll be out, and then we'll have the scenarios pairings with objectives, and that'll give me something to talk about, and that'll be exciting. But besides that, you might not hear from me too much until ETC's closer, or who knows, maybe I'll rant about some other shit I don't like. Thanks for listening.